a quick word on who you are for the tiny number of listeners who may not be aware.
So I'm Labour MP for Leighton and Wanstead. Some 25 or 26 years ago, I joined the Royal Air Force, became a pilot, was a commander of 903 Expeditionary Air Wing in Cyprus, which is the combat wing that operates out of Cyprus. Prior to that, I had flown missions with C-130 aircraft in the initial phases of the Iraq War in 2003.
So, using that as a lens through which to observe the events of this week, what are you concerned about, or what are you worried that people haven't properly clocked?
Well, I think that one of the affronts, actually, is that the consequences of the Iraq War were the loss of 179 people, and some of those were friends of mine. And the big lesson that we took away from that was all wrapped up in a 7-year inquiry, £13 million of UK taxpayers' money, called the Chilcot report, or it came out in the Chilcot report. And the Chilcot inquiry was kind of a landmark moment, and we as defence planners were given guidance. It's out there for people to look at, called the Good Operation, and it lays out a checklist for the things that you need to consider when you are going to go and commit our forces to any kind of operation. There's certain questions that you need to be able to ask, and unfortunately we have seen unserious politicians trying to make political headway out of this, when the lessons from Iraq and the reasons and methods by which we go about planning military operations are clearly laid down there for us.
That's amazing. Most people listening won't be aware of that, and we'll look a little bit more at the detail of it shortly. But it occurs to me first that we're going beyond the simple vagaries of the lessons learned from Iraq, which of course I think 41% of the public think made the world a less safe place. I don't know the exact number of people who still think it was a good idea, but it's a fraction of what it was before it started. So it's not just that we haven't learned the lessons of the Iraq War, we haven't learned the lessons of the lessons.
Exactly.
Of the Iraq
War. Some of the discussions around the legal principles, so if you were to look at the Chilcot a report and ask yourself the things that you would consider, the legal aspect of it isn't actually number one, it's about number 5. The first thing that you would do if you're deciding to take someone on in the street is make the assessment as whether you are going to win. Otherwise you wouldn't swing the first punch, would you?
No.
So you have to understand before you do anything, what is it you're being asked to undertake, and you'll hear people talking about the very specific, like, what is the operation that you are going to do? And we've seen over the course of the week from the Trump administration machinations about whether this is regime change, whether this is about dealing with a ballistic missile program, or any number of ideas.
Did you miss the Armageddon argument?
No, I didn't.
No, so that's on the list as well.
Well, there you go. But the problem is that any one of these things requires an entirely different military package and will commit you over a different amount of time.
Wow, so they're different wars. So every different justification would be for a different type of war.
Also,
and they're contradictory, conflicting and contrasting.
Of course. And also those parameters change. So there is what people didn't understand or wasn't very well communicated, if I'm honest, over the weekend was that initial decision when the US comes and says, and this is a very important point here, when the US comes and says, right, we're going to go and do an operation, and the UK then takes that and decides whether it's legal or not. That's one part of the discussion. When that decision's made, let's assume that we've just said we can't be part of it. That doesn't mean that once that has taken place that you don't have to go through that entire process again a couple of hours later on the basis of what's happened in front of you. Again, it's like standing next to your mate that has decided to punch the bloke instead, and then you standing there and saying afterwards, well, you know what, I'm still not going to wade in, stop him throwing the blows.
Yeah.
Like, it's two different calculus. But the thing is, your mate has decided on his own to make that decision, and you aren't complicit in that decision. but you have to deal with the consequences of it. And that's why they're very separate. And there was this discussion about, well, he's done a U-turn. He hasn't. He's made a separate calculus. And that's why it's reasonable in that separate calculus to say, like, we know, and we've heard from the GCC, this is not just the UK.
Yeah.
This is countries across the Middle East. We heard Qatar talking about it today, saying, Iran, stop throwing missiles at us, at our civilian population, our civilian infrastructure, and being intolerant of it. And well, the UK is part of that calculus now, regardless of how we got there. And the really important thing that was not brought up by any of those that were saying, well, we got this wrong, was the US decided to do this without us. So when people say, well, and Kemi said, well, we should have been shown support. There is also part of the calculus, which is very much in the Chilcot report, that says what happens if you don't do this? What happens if we don't offer them the use of Chagos? Well, they went and did it anyway.
Wouldn't have made any difference.
It might have been more difficult,
sure,
but that's not part of our calculus.
No.
That's part of their calculus. So that again is something that should have been tackled quite head on. We weren't needed. This is symbolic.
I kind of worked that out. My callers worked that out. I think we'd worked that out by pretty much
lunchtime.
Monday lunchtime,
yeah,
actually.
Probably,
but it perhaps could have been laid out a little bit more clearly. That's when you say it wasn't handled as well.
Yeah, no,
as it could have been.
I haven't been a politician that long.
No.
And I don't really I think it's important that we educate our public and we speak about complex things in a complex way. And that's what I was appreciative of the PM in trying to do, is especially on Monday evening when he came and said, look, these are the situations that I've been to. And what I'd really hope for is that other politicians were serious about this at the moment, because the big thing that comes out of this for the UK is our defence isn't in a good way. And when we start having discussions about, so the very next thing that you decide, or part of the calculus whenever you're going to do anything, is it's whether it's sustainable. And one of the things, if you look, so there's been a lot of discussion about our Type 45s. We tried to purchase 12 Type 45s in 2003. They became too expensive. We made that 6. So someone took the risk that it would be lower than the required number. But the infrastructure allowed you to use 6 more adaptively. At some point between then and now, someone then reduced the number of bays that you could service those ships in, because that was another calculus that was made in another defence review. Now, these span governments, but the point is that at the moment that you go to war, at the moment the flag went up, that doesn't mean you can suddenly bring forward the car that you've had waiting in the garage for 6 months that is having its whole...
It's up on brick.
It's up on bricks and it's having its chassis replaced. It is not reasonable to say, well, why didn't you just bring it out? Because some of these maintenance programmes they're very tightly scheduled and you can't afford to miss a gap. And so some of the calculuses weren't brought upon us. And that's why some of the decisions that are made you can argue that they don't appear as coherent perhaps as people would like, but that is a result of the massive underinvestment that we've had in defence, and we need to wake up to it now.
There was one participant in PMQs this week who was either didn't understand or didn't care about what you've just described.
Oh, it's Kemi Badenoch. I mean, it's just... there's more than that.
Go on.
Probably. But, I think one of the things is that actually what we would hope for from a serious opposition leader is to come out and at moments like this, when the nation, we're talking about our collective national security, is for those people to come forward and say, look, how do we get through this together as a nation? And what is required of me as the member of the opposition to make sure that we make this argument a salient one, then to challenge. Now, the person that is always against this is Mr. Farage, who for some reason seems to think that we need to lobby against our country. He's off in the States right now and he will be lobbying against British interests. And that's just unacceptable.
Including British military interests.
Entirely. I really cannot square the calculus that he makes when he goes to the States to talk our country down, to talk down the deals that we have done. They're not not me. I don't. It wasn't me that came up with the Chagos deal. This was done by the Conservative government in the main, and it was something that was done by politicians to remove. The interesting thing is, had the Chagos deal had been done, it wouldn't have been UK sovereign territory from which the US would have launched from. And therefore, we wouldn't have been part of the kill chain, is what it's called, wouldn't have been part of the legal decision to launch those forces on phase one. It wouldn't have made a blind bit of difference. So those people...
hang on, if the Chagos deal had been signed, Trump wouldn't have needed UK...
I don't think I will wait to see, let's see what the lawyers come back with, but I can shoot from the hip. Yeah. What I'm saying is that if that is not UK, the problem is, if it was UK sovereign territory, we would have been part of that decision calculus. If it wasn't sovereign UK territory, then we wouldn't have, and they could have acted anyway.
That's really interesting.
So I don't understand, and this is the nonsense of those people that, again, have been trying to take a political point away from this. Like, we wouldn't be where we are. But Mr. Farage going off and lobbying against our national interests is deeply unpatriotic, and it's deeply upsetting.
Probably not got enough time to try and work out what motivates him, but there is a plurality of professional commentary in this country, chiefly newspapers, some broadcasters, who seem to be entirely at odds with the public polling, with the public opinion on this. We've spent 2 hours this morning, Calvin, trying to work out why right-wing media is so committed to the idea of following Donald Trump relatively blindly into a war that may well turn out to be illegal, but which clearly doesn't meet any of the lessons of Chilcot or Iraq or even Afghanistan, if you wanted to add to the mix, and Libya as well, if we had the time. Do you have a view on why that is? I mean, is it just a business model, or I mean, you don't have to answer this question.
But I mean, some of it is the unfortunate thing is, some of it's misplaced. I mean, one of the things that I'm proudest of is the 4 years that I served in US Special Operations Command, where fighting and as part of the US military. I take great pride in the military medal that I was awarded by the President of the United States, and I am very proud of the relationship we have with the Americans. And indeed, that's where a lot of my views come from, because I'm still in discussion with those people. I have a very live set of message groups where we're talking about this, people that are serving in the US military, and I understand their view and values on this. But the countries are rational, and I am reminded of 1957 and Suez, when our nation was left out alone in a similar situation to this, and the US didn't come to our aid. And so I know when people say, this is like a hemorrhaging of the relationship, this is not. In terms of
Vietnam,
in terms of post Second World War, is this a big crisis? It is not. So don't try and feed your news cycles. Try and do justice to our national security and democracy by having a grown-up discussion about what is necessary and also what is right.
Why do you think Trump started this war?
Well, that's not for me to decide. I mean, I think the thing, if I were to hazard a guess, and I can do this because I'm not a representative of the government, but I would say that the thing to remove from the region is the ballistic missile program more than anything. We've seen that they, as yet, haven't struck any of the nuclear sites. The ballistic missiles are really important because they mean that Iran can extend its terror physically over its neighbours. Were that to be removed, you can remove the US effectively from the Middle East. If they degrade these ballistic missiles, then all of our allies within the region will be able to respond to Iran in the way that they can't whilst this threat looms over them. And that will liberate the US from the Middle East in a way that it hasn't been, and would probably allow it to move towards the Pacific, which is one of the things it's been trying to do. So get yourselves out of Europe by making Europe more capable of its security calculus. Move yourself out of the Middle East by not leaving what is a quite despicable and disgusting regime that has presided over with an iron hand a nation for a generation.
Again, a little reminder for people who've been listening all morning that it's perfectly possible to describe the regime as despicable and disgusting, while also explaining the reasons why wading in with the Americans would not have been the most optimal way to behave. Very short time, briefly. Why is Keir Starmer so firm on this? Have you been surprised by his stance, or is it what you would expect from him?
I think it's serious. It's a serious and sensible stance, and at moments like this, we see that leadership, and people are grateful for it. And we have to wake up to the seriousness of the geopolitical situation that we're in at the moment. And that requires, and there's kind of a bit of a plea here for the media, it requires us to treat serious things seriously, and to not debase discussions into binary with, are you for or against America?
Well, on that, finally, then, on that precise point, have any Tories privately backed what you've been saying?
Yes.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would. And it's not just them, it's also the Liberal Democrats. And people are, I would say, the things to take away is we all recognise the seriousness of the situation, and that we need to mobilise the country's understanding of just how fragile our defence situation is in the UK at the moment, because it has been exposed by extending it to somewhere else.
Indeedy.